yes, to continue a little bit before I get hungry and have to go eat dinner for somebody or something. Let's invite someone over for dinner. Anyway, to continue about that website, as I said, it was set up like each house, each scare zone, the parade, the Bill and Ted show somehow were part of files for patients in an insane asylum. Some of them clearly indicated Shady Brook, intriguingly enough. So that continued. Some of them did not. Some of them, as I said, were harder to pinpoint, but gave you an idea of some supernatural event or backstory for each haunted house in each scare zone. And we'll touch on some of these as we visit the various houses and scare zones in my historical review. Now let's see. So, that year there were 7 houses. And without any further ado, doodly doodly, let's go on into the houses, sort of, in our reminiscence. Well, the first house was called Hoorah in Wax, and I'll start there mainly because it's the one I remember the least, and I don't know why. God knows I went there more than once. 2004 was a significant year for me, you see. I had just left the employ of Walt Disney World, where, as many of you know, I had worked for many years at the Adventurers Club. Now, I could actually do work which utilized my doctoral degree, and I could be Dr. Jimmy in my daily life, in my work, not just a title on my name that looks good. Yes, that was good for me, but also I didn't have to worry about what nights I was available to go out and do whatever, because now my nights were all free. So I could go many more nights than I had before. This was a great deal of fun, and I didn't have to. So that year I managed to go to the park far more times for Halloween Horror Nights than I had in years past. I don't remember precisely how many nights I went that year, but I do know that I purchased for the first time ever a frequent fear pass. Of course, that actually limited some of the peak nights. I think the first night I went was on opening weekend, and after that I got the frequent fear pass and went back and attended on other nights, usually non-peak nights. And thus I was able to see a lot more interesting things going on in the park. Well, that's not bad. Oh dear, I messed that up pretty badly. Is it enough to start over again? No, I don't think so. Please forgive me my vocal blare. And go on. Yes, the frequent fear pass allowed me to go more nights than before. And so I think it's quite likely I met at least 4 or 5 times that year, rather than 1 or 2 or 3 times as I had in years past. And I enjoyed it very much. Naturally. And even though that meant I went into all the haunted houses many times, Horror and Wax escapes my memory a bit, like some houses have over the years. Nevertheless, I know what it was about. It was, of course, a wax museum featuring some of the classic Universal characters, with the conceit that the proprietor of the museum had used actual human beings in forming his exhibits. And so not only did you have the classic Universal characters like Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, Dracula, what have you, in the house, you also had dead bodies trapped in wax, and sometimes you'd see the remains in the workshops where this was done, and the bodies were descended, hanging upside down into a vat of wax to have the flesh melt away and the wax take over and take the form of the places. Of the figurines. The backstory was that the strange gentleman who did all this was named Gunther Karl Dietz, which sounds German to me. Gunther apparently on the Friday the 13th, 1949, started his diary about his mad dreams to do this, and realized it by 1950. But by 1951 he was dead. Something killed him in his house of wax. and his nephew Jeffrey went insane after obsessing about it and got committed to Shady Brook. All of this was found on the website. Very interesting. Now, the next house was called Ghost Town, and that had a very delightful backstory. It all concerned the town of Lightning Gulch. Apparently it was a booming town in the Old West with gold mines, and then, well, something really bad happened during a freak storm. There were riots, and apparently one of the mines collapsed, and then various people in the town got into a riot, and there was killings and shootings and anarchy, and apparently the whole town was wiped off the map as it was some sort of curse. No one could find the town again. When you went to look for it, it wasn't there, unless when you were out hunting for it, just so happened to be the thunderstorm. And if the lightning storm occurred, this town would reappear just as it had existed 100 and something years before. You would even see drinks, cigars that were still burning in the saloon, and drinks that had just been poured fresh and hadn't been drunk yet. Gold everywhere, but if you dared to touch a single coin of gold, the spirits of the dead would haunt you forever, demanding it back. That's what happened to some fellow who was an inmate at some insane asylum, possibly Shady Brook, who was being interviewed by a female psychiatrist. I wonder if her name was Mary. Anyway, that's part of the backstory. And Ghost Town, of course, took you into this town where you would see the characters in the wild, weird Western way, right out of Weird Western comics and Jonah Hex from the 70s, but better than the damn movie, filled with weird, ghoulish things, old Western nightmares, coffin makers, and oh, the stables that smelled so much like horse shit, and oh God, one of the wonderful aromas of that year. Old saloon, all the dead cowboys ready to take you on a necktie party, or shoot you, or whatever. Ghoulish Western fun. This was located in the Soundstage 22. The House and Wax, the Horror and Wax was in Soundstage 20B. That is half of Soundstage 20, just to let you know. I believe Horror and Wax, you entered on the Islands Adventure side. You'd go in. It was the soundstage houses were kind of weird. They're sort of like in both at the same time, but a lot of the entranceways were around the back, over on the Island of Adventure side. Some of them around the bottom, where they're kind of not in one or the other, and some were over on the other side, more on the Universal side. But it was kind of vague in that area which park you were actually in. Technically, it's all on the Universal property, but the way it was on the map was odd. Okay, Horror Nightmares was definitely at Universal Studios Florida in the Xena and Hercules building, which I've mentioned before. The last time it was ever used for Halloween Horror Nights, in fact, it's been closed down. Supposedly it's not usable for anything right now. It's located off of Shrek Alley, as they call it. In there, they had, this was the, basically your nostalgia house from, best hits of previous years house. It featured the icon characters from the preceding years, including Eddie, who of course didn't actually appear in 2001. So this was actually Eddie's first real appearance at Halloween Horror Nights. There were rooms featuring Jack the Clown, the caretaker, the director, all of which were similar to rooms from houses that they had inhabited back in their years. And of course Eddie's house was seen for the first time, similar perhaps to Run, as it might have been, but with Eddie chasing you with a chainsaw. So that was the first time you got to see Eddie at all. Perhaps Eddie was not as well done as he was this year at 20 Years of Fear. Let's just put it at that. But it was at least the first glimpse we had of him. Eddie needed to work out a little bit more, maybe go on a diet. Okay, now, that was in, yes, I mentioned that. Okay, the fourth house was called Deadtropolis, and it was located firmly into the Universal Studios side. Interestingly enough, some of these houses, of course, you didn't get to enter Universal Studios floor. You had to enter through Islands of Adventure when you went into the park. And then some of the houses would open at later times. Some of them would open much later than others. And they actually had the times in the brochure. I actually have the brochure here. Not as well preserved as my 13 one, but still, I managed to keep at least one and have preserved it as best as I can. I note, for example, that Deadtropolis, the house I'm about to talk about, opened at 8 p.m. Whereas Horror Night Nightmares and Castle Vampire opened at 7, Hellgate Prison and Ghost Town at 6:45. I assume Disorientarium and Horror and Wax were both already open the moment you walked in the park. Now, it's interesting is they had the times in the brochure. I don't remember them ever doing that before or since. Certainly they don't do that nowadays. The brochure also was kind of weird that year, maybe because it's a two-part concept. Just to mention it, you didn't have the house descriptions with the little pictures that year, because they had a great big map, just to try to emphasize how big it was geographically, and perhaps not the greatest of brochures, actually, compared to some of the ones that I've enjoyed before and since. But Deadtropolis, the idea here was that this evil company began to, well, not evil intention. They're working on a process to increase the human lifespan, a sort of longevity drug to go beyond, you know, the 77 years that we're supposed to have on this earth and go on to, I think I got the Bible confused with the Gettysburg Address. Never mind. I think it's 70 according to the book of Genesis. Okay, that God allows us, and everything after that is grace. But to go well beyond that, to live over a century or longer, you know, be like Methuselah or somebody. Well, this went wrong, and the longevity caused you not to live any longer until after you were dead. Then you continue to live forever as a zombie. Ah! Yes, flesh-eating zombies. Of course, Deadtropolis was highly influenced by the fact that there had been a huge resurgence of the Romero-style zombies in the media at that time, brought about by the remake of Dawn of the Dead, which was a Universal picture and was playing very well as a hit in theaters. And indeed, scenes from this movie were played in the Q lines as part of the Q video. And that made it quite delightful to tie in with the Universal film at the same time. Although not officially, it wasn't Dawn of the Dead, the house, but it was still obviously connected in quite a thematic way. And it was set in the earthquake queue, and in some ways resembled the Zombiegeddon in layout that we recently had this year. The garage, for example, might even be an homage to Deadtropolis, because you had a garage like that when you went in, and through that and through other, if you went in the front, it was one of the front-loaded earthquake queue house. And you went through all of these scenes of zombie nightmare, because supposedly the whole city, whatever city it was, that this experiment had taken place, sort of umbrella corporation type of company, whatever it was, had done this, so it had some Resident Evil vibe to it too, if you like, those, you know, as well as Dawn of the Dead, and had quarantined the whole city naturally. So that was a nifty zombie house, the first pure zombie house I think they've ever done. And of course there were many zombie houses since then. You can't keep a good zombie down. I mean, that's the definition of a zombie. It won't, if it stayed down, it wouldn't be a zombie, just be a dead guy. Right, right. Okay, now we're coming close to 15 again, and I don't want to start it on Castle Vampire yet, Oh, let me just talk about the backstory of Deadtropolis. There was like this artist who was having these visions of zombies while he started working for that company. That was interesting. Okay, that's it. We're going to come back with part 3 later.